Welcome back to the old Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, CW. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to hit that bell on YouTube and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app. Or just stick around here on YouTube where all the magic happens, all the video and the animation stuff that's coming up. And, you know, it's all good. It's all fun. Welcome back. I appreciate you. Today, I had a 5 count. But then I realized 4 out of the 5 things I wanted to talk about were inconsequential. They meant nothing because the major story I wanted to talk about was the WWE Draft. And I had that as the last slide. I was like, why am I going to talk about all these other 4 things and put the draft out till later, potentially lose people? So let's just talk about the draft right now. This year's WWE Draft felt way more disappointing than normal, mostly because of the hype and the kind of pomp and circumstance they put around it. They touted it as like this new era and so many exciting things were going to happen and the roster's going to switch up and it's going to lead to so many things. I don't doubt that it will lead to some very good stories, but not a lot of things happened. Like not a lot of brand switching happened. A lot of what I would consider more major swaps happened outside of like the main episode of Raw and SmackDown. And honestly, it feels like a busted system that they're trying to duct tape every year, right? They're trying to emulate major sports like the NBA or the NFL or something like that, but then they don't do like really major changes to either roster for, you know, whatever reason. And the thing that caught my ear was that the commentators were really, really pushing the fact that SmackDown and Raw had to maintain their roster. So they had to draft people that we knew were going to stay on the show, like Bianca, like Tiffy, like Seth, Judgment Day. All these major players who have to remain on their respective brands had to get drafted, which leads me to question why even do the draft? Just leave your rosters the way it is. So I know the internet is all about complaining. I complain all the time. But I would rather have a constructive criticism plus solutions to the problem. So instead of just rambling on about why this was bad, let's talk about how they could potentially make it better. So one thing that WWE, at least in the rumor mill, have been talking about is turning NXT into a major brand. So it'll be Raw, SmackDown, NXT, all pretty much on the same line. NXT being, you know, the younger talent, Raw, SmackDown, main talent, but treating them kind of on equal plane. But they still do not do that. And there's no better way to see that than in the WWE Draft. So on Raw and SmackDown, they have the draft, but they would periodically cut to a camera in NXT showing the entire NXT roster watching the draft and celebrating crazy whenever one of their folks got called up to the main roster. They would hand them Raw or SmackDown hats like they were jerseys for a team, and then they would interview them later. That's not the same as Raw or SmackDown talent. If a Raw or SmackDown talent changed brands, they didn't celebrate or get a hat or whatever. They just showed up and made an impact. So it felt less like being drafted to a different show and more like a trade between 2 teams, right? If you want the draft to feel more like the NFL or NBA or something, make it legit like a draft. You're drafting the NXT talent from the minor leagues to the major show. And then once you have, all right, let me double back. I have so many ideas. Focus on NXT. You're drafting talent out of NXT onto the main roster. That's number 1. 2, don't do it on a normal day. Treat it like a pay-per-view. Treat it like a PLE, whatever you want to call it. Hold it on a Saturday on the WWE Network /Peacock. Make it a couple hours and designate however many NXT talent you want to move up, and then have rounds of drafts for Raw and SmackDown to take them. It could be one weekend, it could be whatever you want. It could be short, it could be 2 hours, it could be whatever the case may be. Focus on the younger talent getting a shot at the big time. Carmelo Hayes is a perfect example of someone who got called up and then made an impact, right? He came on SmackDown. He cut a okay promo on Cody. Cody gave him the handshake. They wrestled that night. Fantastic match. And it set Carmelo Hayes up for success moving forward. He got a match with the champ, the top guy. He worked really well. It's going to do nothing but benefit him. That's the kind of thing you want from the WWE Draft. Bringing talent up from NXT and then showcasing them to say, we made the proper pick. We got the blue chipper, right? Moving people from roster to roster, that's exciting, but it's only exciting if actual big deals happen. So, in lieu of drafting people between shows, make it trades. So you can have the draft on a Saturday at Peacock, and then come Monday, you have a trade deadline between that Monday and that Thursday that the shows can meet and talk and see who they need and make trades based on that. So something like we just traded, the LWO for Judgment Day, or we traded Alpha Academy off of Raw to get Bobby Lashley as a singles player. I'm just talking nonsense. But you have those sort of like major trades where maybe you're like, Gable and the Creed brothers have been drafted to SmackDown while, I don't know, AJ Styles as a singles wrestler went to Raw. Then you can have interviews for Pierce and Nick Aldis as to why they did that. And then you can infuse storyline into that. So Nick can say, well, we have the strongest tag division here, and we really wanted Chad Gable and the Creeds as a triplet to kind of compete for the titles over here on SmackDown. And we gave them AJ Styles because AJ Styles made mention that he wanted to go after, the Intercontinental title or the, whatever title on Raw. And we brokered a deal. We felt it was an even trade. We got 3 guys for 1 AJ Styles. He's phenomenal. They can have him. It's great. And we get 3 top guys. You can build in storylines for both Nick Aldis and Adam Pearce so that they have kind of like this antagonistic sort of brand versus brand thing going where they're trying to one up each other in a trade, trying to say, oh, I traded for this person, but they're injured, so they won't get a whole lot of use out of them, versus, oh, I traded down for, a pick on the NXT draft that'll happen, this week or whatever. I don't know how they frame it, but you can build in better stories if you're not so focused on, we're going to shuffle the rosters completely. You're not, and you can't. And that's the thing. That's why I feel like the draft was a bit confusing and a little disappointing, because we all knew certain wrestlers couldn't go places. Plus, we're right on the edge of Backlash, where they already set up matches for titles. They kind of got around it in a loophole, saying like if someone goes drafted to Raw, but they had a SmackDown match, if they won the titles for the SmackDown match, they'll stay on SmackDown. There were so many weird loopholes and rules to it. Just toss it out. Draft the NXT people up. And they had really good draft ups, like Dragunov was coming up. They had the businesswoman, I forget her name. I apologize. And then you had, Carmelo Hayes. Damn, I had her name was on the tip of my tongue. I'll look it up. But they had really good call-ups from NXT. And some of the best moments from the draft were watching those NXT people react to being called up to the main roster. That's perfect. Just do that. Because the main roster people do not care that they're still on the main roster. They're just swapping days. So use that as as fuel for storyline, and then use the NXT call-ups as like a moment of like true elevation for these talents. And it also enhances NXT because they have their own PLE where they get to, maybe in between draft showcases, they get to showcase matches, and here's this person's being called up. Let's take a look at some of their highlights. And you can do a lot with that draft. Maybe the 2 nights are like 2 weeks, and then you have the trade in between, and you can trade up for a pick on NXT in the second week. If you do, there are people who pay attention to the NFL and NBA and all these drafts who can make a better sort of framework for how it could work than I can, but I'm just spitballing. I like the idea of trading big stars because, again, you can do more with less, right? Like if you manage expectations of your fan base and say the whole roster's not changing, every roster is going to remain the same, but the two general managers may broker a crazy deal where a talent from over here shows up on Raw based on a trade and makes a huge impact, which will make a bigger impact. But they find themselves, they being WWE, with fans feeling less than thrilled about the WWE draft because they expected wild changes, crazy shakeups, all this, and it didn't happen. As a matter of fact, a lot of the draft picks from night 1 and night 2 were very standard. They were just maintaining their roster, which begs the question, why even do it? If you're just there to maintain your roster, and they made that very clear. They have to make sure that they don't lose certain people to Raw or to SmackDown. Then why do it? Why even do it? If you're gonna, and the reason I say that is because professional wrestling, WWE, AEW, they're in the business of entertainment. They're in the business of spectacle. And the draft gives you the opportunity to make a real big spectacle of we just threw the book, the rosters are screwed up, everyone's everywhere, Bianca's over there, her husband's over there, friggin' NXT has been decimated, they're all in Raw now, we have to get a whole new you can do whatever you want, is what I'm saying. And to do the least, but then wrap it in this very grandiose packaging just feels it's just disappointing, right? It could have been so much more. So I propose that next year, I mean, no one's watching this, but I propose next year for the draft, one, they move it up instead of moving it right before Backlash, which again makes no sense whatsoever. That they've already started down the road of some of these storylines for Backlash, and then you're going to try and shake up the roster. That makes absolutely no sense. Take the draft, make it the night after WrestleMania or the week after WrestleMania. So you have the Raw after WrestleMania, which is basically night 3 of WrestleMania. And then that following Saturday, you have the WWE draft. So now you've moved the draft up so that it makes sense for the rest of the year. You get those trades in, you get the drafts in early, and you don't have to worry about people being like, well, if I get drafted to Raw, or if they get drafted to Raw, but they have a championship match on SmackDown and they win the titles, do they stay there? Do they go to Raw and take the belts? I mean, all you have to do is go look at the rules for the WWE draft, and you can see how they were just trying their hardest to kind of duct tape and band-aid loopholes and kind of fix former problems, like when champions would swap shows and they would have to give belts to each other. It was just this awkward move, and so they were like, no, all champs are exempt. So then why are we doing this? If we can't move Sami Zayn to SmackDown with the IC title, or move Logan Paul to Monday nights, or swap the tag team titles, or whatever, like, we're not having any fun. We're not. And then the fact that they then continued the draft outside of the main show, so you had to kind of pay attention to another show, I think it was The Bump or something, to see the supplemental draft picks. Some good picks when, like, Natalya got called back from NXT, now she's on Raw. Baron Corbin's on SmackDown. The Creed brothers went in the supplemental draft, which I feel is a crime, especially if the rumors are true that they're going to be tagging with Chad Gable. They should have gone in an earlier round. Those guys are blue. This is what I mean. Like, they are blue chippers. They are new to the roster, relatively, maybe a couple months, but they would have been a perfect part of the NXT draft to say, we're bringing this blue chip team up to supplement our tag division, and we're entering them in some sort of tournament to see how well they do, as you know, to be entered into a tournament. I don't know, something, right? Do something interesting, something that you can build long-term stories and have a little bit more fun and emulate the sports that you're looking to emulate. That's my solution to the WWE draft problem. What do you think of my solution to the WWE draft problem? Let me know in the comments. Did you enjoy the draft? Who was your pick in the draft? Who did you want to shift shows that didn't? I'll give you an example. I wanted Judgment Day to split up. and half of them go to SmackDown and the other half stay on Raw. I wanted Rhea Ripley to get drafted, but she didn't, because she's injured. But then what showed is you see the plot holes. I'm sure she's going to stay on Raw, but why? So many. Anyway, who did you want to get drafted to either show? Let me know in the comments. That's all I got for today. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. And don't you ever forget.
I'm your friend, but if I ever see you in the ring, I can beat you. Don't you know? Yeah, yeah, yeah!